How do you encourage a large-scale high-street fashion retailer to put sustainability at the heart of its operation? How do you deal with the inevitable conflicts that arise when stakeholders have competing priorities? And how can the values of one person influence a global supply chain? I'm Sally Ann Airy, and welcome to Fearless Forward, the podcast that asks leaders how they've faced their fears. Today I'm in conversation with a retail leader who's setting the pace in tackling one of the world's biggest environmental challenges, fashion waste. Since 2020, she's been the architect and driver behind an initiative that's turning a huge high street fashion brand, known for its affordable prices, into a force for sustainable change. Lynne Walker is director of Primark Cares, and her job is to redefine how Primark can balance profit with planet. It's a Herculean task, particularly in a global company whose reputation has been built on providing ever-changing fashionable products at low prices and historically has been widely criticised for its environmental footprint. But Lynne's credentials for this are impeccable. With a master's degree in fashion design, she'd spent nearly 30 years in mainstream fashion retail, including Primark, buying and developing products across all ranges around the world. 4 years ago, Lynne and her team launched the Primark Cares strategy to build on the previous 15 years of progress of making sustainable fashion affordable for everyone. Through its 3 pillars, product, planet and people, Primark Cares is embracing the large-scale change that the fashion industry urgently needs. Over 60% of Primark products are now made with recycled or sustainably sourced materials. Circular design principles are being embedded. Repair workshops are being offered free to customers and staff across Europe and the US. And cotton growers are being trained in sustainable farming methods and wage and employment rights. In an industry that has long been driven by speed and disposability, what Lynne and her team are doing is genuinely complex and radical. Collaboration, she says, helps make a seemingly enormous problem smaller. In the end, no one will take the credit, but we can all contribute. In this conversation, we explore what it takes to lead this kind of change, the internal and external obstacles Lynne has had to overcome, the fears she's faced, and why courage, collaboration, and persistence are key to transforming an entire business model. So, Lynne, moving from product into the world of sustainability, what led you there?
It's a really great question to start with, Sally Ann, actually, because there's not one defined path that got me there, actually. But I suppose I'd been in the fashion industry probably then 20 plus years. Probably don't want to admit to how many years, actually. But and I have, if it's fair to say, a restless soul. So I think it comes from having a creative background. So always interested in what next? Where can I make impact? Very much a people person. So within my men's role, led large teams. And actually I had got to the point that had been really driven in that space and had very big connections, but felt that I needed and wanted to do something else. And at the time, I got very much involved in a strategic project, which was all about looking at how we move the product teams forward for the future. What are the processes within the business that we can refine, change? And that sort of very much led me into a strategic place, obviously very much linked to my product teams and role, but obviously much more looking outward in terms of what else makes a business like Primark successful? What makes it tick? And I actually very much came involved with other people, what we would call in the industry central functions. So working with legal and strategy and finance, and actually realized there was a big world out there. Alongside that, at the time, I was very much involved as one of the directors of probably 25 directors in the business, realizing that actually we needed to be much bolder, much more forward thinking in our sustainability programs, and actually looking towards what's the future direction of the fashion industry, the world, and Primark itself. And was very much involved in looking at what was most material in that space. And And actually, to sort of cut to the chase or be very simple, I actually went and asked for the role to lead it. And the role didn't actually exist, but I got very brave and marched up the stairs to our CEO and said, I'm really interested in this. It will be really challenging to my personal skills. It'll be really challenging to my knowledge. I know everything in the product world, but I know some about this world, but it isn't something that I know that well. And probably the other little bit of the story to add colour is it was the middle of COVID. Primark had no stores open at the time because we were a bricks and mortar, or we are a bricks and mortar retailer. And we continued, and it shows the value of Primark Cares and what the business really put value and commitment behind it. But they wanted to continue with this project and actually put somebody in it to lead it and support the business and bring, or I would use the word convene all stakeholders together. It was stepping into the sustainability world, and I'm hugely respectful of people that have that as their career and have had it for many years. But actually, what they really wanted with this role is around people that, or a person that has people skills, can, as I use the word, convene others, can show passion, resilience, flexibility, I would say, and obviously is invested in the topic. But what's been really, I would say, has made us very successful in this space is because we've brought a different conversation, a different skill set into sustainability. So I come from a commercial background. I have a creative background. I understand the fashion industry. I have strong relationships with people internally and externally, and I understand manufacturing or sourcing or the supply chain. And now I would be very passionate about, to be successful in the sustainability space, I would say it can't, to use the phrase, sit on the shoulders of one team or one person. You have to involve lots of different skills. And I suppose that's why I ended up in that role, because I have a different skill set to what would be a classic sustainability team.
This is going to sound like an obvious question because I think everyone would go, well, of course, but I'm going to ask it anyway. And that is, why is it big and bold to take care of sustainability in the fashion world?
It's a few reasons, really. I mean, it's a very important industry. It's a very big industry. Clearly, when you talk about people and planet, the industry can have large impact. They absolutely need to be responsible and to reduce that impact. But also, it's probably, and I've been in the industry for many years, nearly 30 years, to admit that, but actually it has high creativity, high passion. But with many industries, it's facing new challenges and probably needs to change. And why I get very passionate about, well, I'm very passionate about Primark, but the business is because we are a scaled business. That doesn't mean that we don't need to be a responsible business. We absolutely are. But with scale, that means you can drive impact, you can improve people's lives. You can reduce your impact on the planet, but you can also drive innovation. You can drive consumer behavior change. So I feel that it's probably lots of reasons of why it needed to change. And also the wider world, everybody understands that and can see that climate change is happening and that you can't separate people from planet. They come hand in hand, but actually it is a business's responsibility to reduce their impact and really drive change into the wider world as well. And that is corporate responsibility, but it's also much more than that. It is about offering those skills within the organisation, the impact on the supply chain, to really drive change. So it's probably not one direct answer, Sally-Ann. It's a mix of many things.
Yeah, so it's big. It's wide-ranging for sure. Your skill set was invaluable because you had that breadth of experience and knowledge. And it's bold because I guess at that time, and possibly still, it was going against a tide of practice, generations of doing the opposite, really. Can you tell us a bit more about the specific changes that you felt it was necessary to introduce as quickly as possible to make the impact that you wanted to make within Primark Cares on Primark as an organisation and more widely?
I think we do have to start with history, and it is about how do you explain where Primark have come from, and it generally is a real positive story. But we had gone. Sustainability isn't new to Primark. We had 15 years or now where we sit today, 15, 17 years of a very big sustainability team driving real impact. So the number is over 200 people, not all coming under myself, but actually, or reporting to myself, but actually driving change. And I think where we actually got to is, with any organization, you need to evolve. And there's different risks coming in and out of an organization. And the fashion industry at the time was facing a number of challenges, which probably many industries face around how are we going to reduce carbon emissions? How are we going to reduce our impact on the planet? How are we going to improve the livelihoods of the people that work in the supply chain? And I suppose with Primark Cares, it was very much around trying to understand. It's a strange thing to say, what are those risks and those opportunities, I suppose, but really, how do we hold ourselves accountable? And actually, by putting targets out there, or we call them commitments, and with a future date, it actually aligns people around a purpose, around a commitment. You will not always get things right. Change is hard, and change is not always linear. There is curves and pathways to this. There's compromises that you have to make, but actually putting a Primark Cares strategy out there, and our Primark Cares strategy is built around 3 pillars, which is quite simplistic in language, so people actually understand it and they can get behind it, because sustainability can be very technical. It is very science-led, but you actually need to win hearts and minds as well. So we deliberately made those commitments. They are wide-ranging and they are defined by a date and a commitment, but it is around product, planet, people. So what is most material to Primark and the fashion industry? And the reason to put dates on there is not to have a lofty commitment. It is actually to align people around that and to drive progress and actually hold the business and the fashion industry to account, and actually then report on that progress. So you've actually got something in concrete or out there publicly to be able to think about, well, how do we drive that commitment now? But really understanding what was most material to the business, where we can make the most impact, but also staying very true to who we are as a business. And we always have, for many, many years, plus 50 years, we've been always about affordable fashion that is accessible and everybody is included. And we didn't do anything different with sustainability. It was always about how can we actually make product more sustainable, but keep it affordable. Therefore, everybody can drive or be part of the change that's required.
So staying true to the purpose of the organisation, the reason Primark exists, but bringing in your commitments to a more sustainable way of doing it.
Yeah, and also building on progress of what I said. So 15 years of progress. It's not an excuse to say, well, we've done a lot of things, but what actually it gives you is really strong foundations to build on. So things like transparency, innovation, investment. How do you have a robust and responsible supply chain? And then, some of the challenges that are facing the industry and what we've actually focused on around Cares is, how do we move to be a more circular and more sustainable business? How do you reduce waste? How do you actually, with a large scale organization, reduce carbon emissions? How do you actually invest more in people through skills training or mental health training? So they're really, really important commitments. But actually, you do have to have them future-proofed of what challenges are facing the world, facing people and facing the industry, as well as the organisation.
So in all of that, what has been the biggest challenge to you personally in leading all of this?
I think the first thing when I took the role having, my background, and I have moved roles, but my background was always within the product world with a similar type of people, similar processes day in, day out, similar visits and a workflow. And actually stepping into something completely new, even though it was in Primark, actually gave me huge imposter syndrome. And it was very interesting because I'm running a large scale program. I have new relationships and people to inspire and lead. And actually, I thought, I don't know anything about this topic. And does that mean that I have no skills? Or I challenged my own skills that had been built up over 20 or 20 plus years. So imposter syndrome played out hugely. And then, second to that, over time, that's evolved into testing me in other spaces. So I would do quite a bit of, let's call it public speaking or building external relationships. And I am a people person, but that has really challenged me in terms of confidence. How do you get a really strong message out there, but remain really authentic? And that would be one of my values, that if I'm talking about something or I'm committing to a large program of work, I want to be honest. I want to do it with integrity and authenticity. So, trying to layer all of those things on in a world that you're not familiar with can feel quite challenging as well.
Can you think of a moment where that played out in real time for you?
Probably two. The first was internally when we do something within Primark, which is probably common, called a town hall, where we communicate our strategic projects to the organisation or business updates. And I had to do Primark Cares. And I have spent my career presenting fashion ranges to very senior people. But suddenly I had, an organisation of thousands and thousands of people. We have 80,000 colleagues in Primark, and talking about a topic that was in some ways quite new to me, but also showing myself in a different light with peers. And I felt, oh, will I be judged? Am I saying the right thing? Do I sound credible? So that whole, I guess, internal and external stage was quite challenging. And then I suppose externally, a very simple example that we went out with Primark Cares about using our scale for good. And what I mean by that is, where can Primark as a scaled organisation lead the industry? Where can we talk about our learnings, our lessons, our opportunity to drive change within the industry? And they're usually not necessarily big stages in that way, but you're putting yourself out there as a person talking on behalf of the business and talking in some ways, as I said, about quite a complex topic. And then, Primark, often people will always have a view on a large scale retailer. So sometimes you can feel judged, or that scaled program of change is under your watch. So therefore it can feel quite personal, and therefore you can feel not quite protected at times.
So particularly, I suppose, both internally and externally, but perhaps particularly on the world stage, so to speak, of the fashion world, externally in those early days when people had all of the questions that they're bound to have had and still do. How do you blend your important values with the need to show up and represent Primark with credibility? How do you, it's a genuine question, Lynne, how do you do that? Because I think that's really hard.
How do I answer that? I got very comfortable with what skills I could bring to this world. Therefore, rather than challenging that I didn't know enough, or am I going to sound authentic or with credibility, I got very comfortable that I have skills that will be additive to this world, will be a positive. They might not be the same skills as other people that sit in it. And over time, that became more comfortable, and I really celebrate those still, because I celebrate the differences rather than trying to be the same. On the credibility front specifically, I have a value of being honest, and I've stuck true to that. And I think honesty and credibility are sometimes quite interlinked. in that if you are honest and that you come across very open, you try and explain where you might be with this program or within Primark or the change that you're trying to make, that you don't have all of the answers, for example, is always another one. And that you actually demonstrate in actually quite a humble tone that why change can be hard rather than just making excuses. And so I think that those skills that I talked about at the beginning, I am quite a people person. I am very honest. I think with that comes credibility, and I've often had that as feedback now, whether it's on the world stage, to coin a phrase, or internally, that you're really honest, you're really open, you're unafraid to answer the difficult questions. And sometimes I think that naturally gives you, well, not sometimes, it does give you credibility. And it gives you a license to have an opinion.
So what I'm hearing is that rather than focusing on the skills that you thought you lacked, you homed in on the ones that you had. You turned them to your advantage. You used them, you put them center stage and built on them. And with that, people started to trust you. So with credibility comes trust, right? So the people you're speaking to internally, of course, your team and the wider piece and the management board, upwards and downwards and crossways and everything else, building a reputation. So when people think of you and the work that you're doing internally, they know who you are, what you stand for. You're building trust. Outside, for people who don't know much about Primark, other than that it's affordable clothing and so on, there'll be all sorts of assumptions, I'm imagining, which will have changed over time because of all the great work you've done. But over the years of leading this, what have been the challenges where your credibility might have been questioned? Where have you felt any sense of, as you alluded to earlier, personal attack?
Absolutely. I think it's less than I actually feared, but I think that's sometimes the way, or not sometimes, it's the way we've actually approached it. So I think in the external world, you are never ever going to win everyone, and nor should you even try. I think you are there to be honest, open, and look for solutions and really focus on that, because we all need to find solutions to what ultimately is a climate crisis that is affecting, as I said earlier, planet and people. And I don't say that lightly. So I think in the external world, though, and particularly when you launch a large program of strategic change with longer timescales, you have to do what you said at the beginning. So it's not just about putting lofty commitments out there. It's about a consistency of approach. So we said we would be honest. We said we would communicate, and said we would do that. For example, every year we will talk about our progress. We will do it as honestly and openly as we can, and we will say the challenges as well as the opportunities. So I think over time I've seen that shift with just being consistent with that. And also the other thing externally is, again, when you commit to big strategic change, I love the phrase, you have to deliver what it says on the tin, or you have to do what it says on the tin, because that's absolutely it. If you make commitments, you have to be able to show progress, or give an update. So demonstrating that, not just the consistency of telling everyone where we've got to, but actually being able to demonstrate very tangible examples of what you've done or what you've achieved, what the business has achieved. And I think over time that progress, with the very honest, humble, open narrative, really does change the conversation. I think the other thing is, and I said it at the beginning, that we are a scaled retailer, and we need to, I'm welcoming of that, because to really drive change in this world, everybody has to be welcome. So as long as you follow the right principles of being a responsible business, but actually to drive change, scale has to be a voice around the table. So actually being able to, and again, I don't say that lightly, leading the industry, But there is a lot of things that we've done, and we've learned lessons, and we've altered our plan, our strategic plan, but we've actually shared those lessons with the wider world. And that is what I mean by standing up, having a voice, and being a responsible retailer, but also moving the industry to change. Because when we talk about a number of people working in this space plus 200, that means that we have lessons and opportunities to share. So being able to do that. So I guess to summarize, a consistent approach, an honest and open dialogue, and then sharing learnings. Because the industry that I've actually been in for many years would never have been as open as it is today, because I think everybody's realized that people have to come together in the right way to solve some of the issues that we're facing.
Do you feel then that you're leading the field, so to speak, in that?
I think it really depends on the topic. I mean, it's a very complex topic. So we have said we will be a more circular and more sustainable business. And what that has actually meant, that we've invested in various areas here. So we've invested in obviously a change program, but we've invested in people to drive that change. So within my team, I've actually created a team that concentrate on how do we move our products to be more circular. And so we've given new opportunities to people within the organisation. We've trained our colleagues, we've trained suppliers in new skills that wouldn't have historically been in the fashion industry, and we've done it at scale. And then another example, when we talk about, we've done a program which started off as one email from one customer for repair workshops. So how do we bring the art of repair back into the conversation? Because it isn't really taught in schools anymore. It's not taught at scale. So we've used the Primark Cares program to introduce repair into our stores through free workshops for our customers. So actually really focusing on areas that can be quite simplistic, but actually have large scaled results, really actually demonstrate change and can lead the industry or can support customers to make different choices. To think about actually that clothing can last longer by stitching a button on. That's really, in some ways, simplistic, but people don't think that way.
And speaking of that, I was listening to you earlier when you were talking about some of the challenging conversations you've had externally as you've been leading this project. It struck me that in the face of your detractors, and from what I'm hearing, they may be getting fewer and fewer, but over the years, remembering that in the end, we're all trying to do the same thing. There is a common purpose to this. Everyone wants the planet to survive. Everyone wants to limit climate change. Well, most people. So we're on the same page, aren't we? And people will be challenging those in roles for whom it's their job to challenge. That's what they'll do. And I suppose over the years, Lynne, you've learned, if that's the right verb, but you've learned how to take it all less personally and look more strategically at what we're all trying to achieve here.
I'm slightly smiling. I know people can't see me smiling, but I am laughing. And slightly, sometimes, do I take it less personally? I have definitely learned to do that, Sally-Ann. Sometimes it can hurt because I'm very passionate about Primark. I'm very passionate about the team that I see them every day work tirelessly to achieve and to make change. And that can be quite a lonely place at times. So I think sometimes you can't help but take it quite personally, but you definitely need to concentrate on how do you keep going? How do you drive change? How do you motivate? And sometimes just have the honest truth or the conversation. Because actually what I often find in conversations where people might have a hurtful assumption, perception versus reality is very different. And actually, probably often when I communicate some of the stories that we're talking about now, sometimes people, the biggest reaction I get is, I did not know that about Primark. Or, isn't that amazing? Or, wow, tell me more. And that's what motivates you to tell it again and then again. and eventually that maybe dampens down the the personal hurt or the how do you keep going. This is a complex space and it can feel personal, but actually to make it less personal probably is the way to achieve more and realize that you should welcome everybody into the conversation. I suppose I would say it's passionate. I do get very passionate about it. And yes, that passion is a very fine line between passion and anger at times. And sometimes I can get quite angry about the perception. But then also I think actually, what is the alternative? So most people won't know this, but in Primark, very similar to the rest of the fashion industry, we don't own our own supply chain. We have strong partnerships for many, many years with suppliers who make the clothing, the products for us, but we don't own it. It doesn't mean we're not responsible, but we don't own that. But actually, when we're talking about a change program, the scale of Primark Cares, and people are questioning, is it authentic? Are you really making the change that you should be making? I think about indirectly, we support in excess of 650,000 people in that supply chain. And if we are not making those changes, which also involve, it's not just about products, it's about people's livelihoods. It's about mental health and well-being. It's about women empowerment programs, really, really important programs within the fashion industry, and that is making a difference. And if we're not welcoming of businesses with scale, then what happens to the people that are in that supply chain? And that's why it's really important to remember that you're not just talking about a company or a retail store that sells product. It's a whole ecosystem of people's livelihoods as well as having 80,000 colleagues in Primark as well.
What resonated with me most, taking us right back to the beginning of this conversation, was that day when you walked into the CEO's office and made your recommendation. It was all about making a difference, wasn't it, Lynne?
It was, but I don't know if I realised that at the time, and I have since realised that. You mentioned personal purpose there, and initially, absolutely, now it was about making a difference, but probably, and I don't know if this is selfish or not, but initially it was, am I pushing myself enough? Am I bored in my role? I love my role, but could I do more? So maybe that is pushing yourself, but I don't think I'd appreciated that a role like this can drive so much change, and that how much my personal purpose has become my professional purpose as well. And they're one in the same now. That being in an industry for many years, yes, of course, you reinvent yourself and you create new skills or you learn new skills. But actually, sometimes it's about, you don't maybe realize that actually you can step into a role that can make real change to whether it's the people that you work with, whether you're inspiring leaders of the future, whether you are changing a historical industry to do better. And that is, yes, it feels like a huge responsibility, but I don't think I'd appreciated how much change by taking this role I could make, and how passionate I am about that, or really that has become my purpose, because it's not just a role that is transactional and I do my role and I have a job or I have a career. It's about, actually, I'm in an industry that I love and I can make a difference.
So you started with an idea that felt true to you for whatever reason. When you were challenging yourself, am I being bold enough? I guess that comes from a place, perhaps subconscious at the time, of wanting to make a difference and wondering if you're pushing yourself enough to do that because it mattered to you, right? And then from this idea, getting started and realizing the enormity of it and all of the different, huge scale, huge scope, huge potential. So in all of that, as you look back, can you remember moments where you thought, what have I done?
Yes, I mean, the classic ones that, within any corporate world, you have a difficult meeting. You feel when you lead with purpose, sometimes not everybody in the organization or the wider world is on the same page as you, and that can feel misaligned or hurtful. So yes, there's been meetings that have been difficult and you haven't got the right result, and you think, oh, shall I go back to my old career? Because this role, I said at the beginning, is a lot about stakeholders and convening lots of different people with different opinions. Even though you've got a North Star as such with a strategy, it doesn't mean that everybody is on the same page all of the time. So there's been challenges. And also, I lead a small, in terms of the Primark Cares team, the team is relatively small, but we obviously align within the wider sustainability organization of Primark. But a lot of those people have come out of their careers to retrain into sustainability and strategy. So you feel their responsibility as well. So there's times when you just actually have to step up and be the leader that you are, but really motivate and pick those people up as well. So yeah, there's been the very difficult meetings. Externally, I touched on it. Sometimes when you might have done, again, something like a podcast, there was one moment that there was a podcast quite early on. And actually, again, it was, oh, I didn't know that about Primark. It was relatively challenging in terms of the questioning because it was very early on. But the podcast was absolutely fine. And it was good, and people still often refer to it about, isn't this great, the story that Primark have to tell? But actually, in the modern world of commentary on social media, somebody had put a comment about, if you listen to this, if you like listening to an elephant crashing around, listen to this podcast, i.e., I wasn't knowledgeable enough in the sustainability world, but that was one voice. And so you sometimes have to really not take those things. It's one voice in a voice of millions. But sometimes human nature is to concentrate on the one comment or the one voice. But actually, generally, so what is true in this conversation is most people, particularly now, are, wow, this is incredible, the work that Primark are doing, the team are doing. We have amazing partnerships in the industry now that people want us to speak because we're driving change, want us to take action. So if you listen to the one voice, it can feel quite hurtful. So there's a number of times I have gone, can I go back to my world of menswear, please?
I can imagine. So the fear of being misunderstood, the fear of the one voice that's going to detract from all the other hundreds and thousands of positive voices. And yet, strangely enough, the one voice is often the one we listen to, right? But what do you do now when that happens?
I'm sure there's a perfect answer to that, Sally Ann, in your world of coaching.
Give me your answer.
My answer might be depending on the day. There is sometimes I have a personality. Maybe it comes from creativity. I am a people person, as I said. So I tend to, in those two combinations of creativity and being empathetic, I think I take things sometimes quite personally and can, I suppose, stew on them for a little bit of time. So sometimes I do just need to sit with it, and I will go over it in my head, and I will comment on it, and I will find a trusted friend or colleague or family member, and I'll go over it and over it until I finally burn it out of my system. And then I go the other way and just say, okay, I'm over that now, and get on with it and become about what's the next thing, which is that creative, resilient soul where I said that, not necessarily a low attention span, but very much a what's the next thing. I have high energy for that. So yeah, sometimes I sit with it now more, and I think that's as you develop in why this role has been amazing for me as a leader, because whilst I'm very passionate about my product role that I used to do, it was much more internal, and it was much more similar types of people and voices, where my role now just introduces me to a much more varied landscape of people, experiences, cultures. So I think that then indirectly makes you more resilient, more open to newer things. Maybe you don't take things as personally because, change is really hard. And when you're talking about a strategy that is 2030 and it's never going to be, as I said, a straight path, you do need to flex and amend, and that also means your emotions as well, or how many wins can you get. Maybe you just need to actually refocus and celebrate on what was the one thing I did well today. So it's probably a mix of things, I would say.
Yeah, but just taking your own advice there, what are you choosing to focus on? Noticing when we, for whatever reason, we're focusing on something that didn't go quite as well as we'd have liked. Do we decide to spend our time focusing on that or all the other many, many things that did go right? So it's interesting, isn't it? Just noticing, and of course, tiredness, stress, all the things that play into that, but just remembering, okay, what am I focusing on here?
I agree with that. And somebody said to me a long time ago that the world of sustainability can feel very exciting, but it can feel quite difficult and quite draining. And sometimes people feel that they actually have to pass the baton on, as to coin a phrase, to other people. And it really made me think about that. So now, rather than passing the baton on, because I have a huge amount of energy still to be in this world and I thoroughly enjoy it, but I actually put much more value in personal health and well-being and trying to stay grounded, or what works for me to be able to do that. And lots of people have different things. Mine would be yoga, for example, sea swimming. So really working out that what nourishes you to then make you be able to step into how am I going to face the next day, or what challenges I've got today. I didn't put as much value into that as I do now.
Fantastic. So you've realized that in order for you to show up as the leader you want to be, you have to invest in the things that feed that, that nourish it, right? And that sounds as if it's made a big difference.
It has, and Sally Ann, if you don't mind me saying, you would have been a large part of that journey as well. But it has taken me a long time to realize that. And sometimes I actually think, although obviously I chose a role with purpose and very much future facing, it has taught me other things rather than just the professional skills, which I find still quite surprising, actually, because it is how you show up, how you remain, as I said, resilient. How do you hold your or how are you still hold your integrity or your honesty, etc., etc. Everything we've talked about, and that's been a real interesting lesson for me in this role. I don't know if I would have learnt it in my old role, but who knows? Different times.
I want to suggest possibly not, because how do we learn these things if we don't challenge ourselves a bit, move outside what's comfortable into the unknown, and find out a bit more about who we are?
Yeah, I think that's very wise. And I often am very good at, within my leadership team or my wider team, talking, and very good at giving advice, maybe not so good at taking it at times. But I often talk about something somebody once talked to me about, that if you stay in, let's call it a comfort zone, I draw it because I'm visual. So a circle, the inner circle is your comfort zone, and it's safe, and it's can feel maybe not high energy at times, but it's okay. And then actually you have to go step out into the next circle, the wider circle, which makes you feel slightly not anxious, but your heart beats a bit faster, or you feel, oh, I'm not quite sure that I'm standing on solid ground, or and I've generally realized that definitely with this role that's done that, but you have to push out into the next circle to feel that and really push yourself onto other things. If you go too far in the circle, which is the next one, it's like panic and it can shut you down. But I do quite like that analogy of thinking, are you in your comfort zone, or are you in the next circle, which is driving you onto other things?
Oh, yes. And how do you know? You mentioned, keeping, I'm paraphrasing, but keeping stable ground. I'm imagining for a moment, crossing a small river or a big stream, and you've got stepping stones, and you don't want to lose your balance and fall in. So you get to the next rock and you stand there for a moment, regain your stability before moving on, or you hop over it. But the key is to keep stability, isn't it? So that you don't fall in. So that's what I'm hearing here, Lynne, is that sort of moving outside into the next circle, regaining stability, taking stock. Where am I now? All of that in simplistic terms. That's what the image that came to my mind. So when you look forward, looking at everything that you've achieved, an enormous amount, and everything there is still to do. What does Fearless Forward mean to you?
Oh, you always leave the hard questions to the very end, Sally-Ann. I would say being brave, continuing. Am I allowed to say continuing? That might seem slightly boring, but continuing, realizing that you don't need to do it on your own, bringing others with you into being fearless. So yeah, I think there's still so much to do. So it means to me, I think leading with compassion, but absolute resilience and direction, and being really clear on where you're trying to get to, being really clear on what is the vision of that, even if you're not quite sure how to get there yet. And actually living with that, being okay with that, because sometimes there isn't a clear plan, particularly not in this world. So, and being okay, or in your terminology, fearless, being accepting of that, to say, this is going to take so much effort, energy, passion, resilience, and just accepting that and being excited by it rather than, I guess, worrying about it. So yeah, it means lots of different things to me, but I suppose fearless to me is about where am I going next and who do I need to bring with me to support that fantastic journey.
Lynne, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks. It was really great. Thank you so much for inviting me, Sally-Ann.
What struck me most about this conversation with Lynne wasn't just her bold move into sustainability, but the way she framed it, not as a pivot, but as an expansion of her own role and of what leadership can be. Lynne didn't wait for the perfect conditions. She asked for a role that didn't yet exist, in the middle of a pandemic, in a business with no open stores. This is a great example of how clarity sometimes comes after the leap, not before. And Lynne's leap wasn't entirely into the unknown. It was rooted in a deep knowledge of her industry, a strong internal network, and a sense of where real influence comes from. She didn't bring sustainability credentials, but she did bring the ability to build relationships across functions and to make things happen. She also brought a commercial mindset. While she doesn't claim to have all the answers, Lynne's background in product and supply chain gave her the credibility to talk about sustainability in ways that make sense to the business. If you're a leader leading into an uncertain future, you might take a leaf out of Lynne's book. Stay curious, stay connected, and don't wait for permission. Thank you for listening. Fearless Forward is edited and produced by Mark Steadman. I'll be back with you in 2 weeks for our next conversation about how leaders have faced their fears. To be sure of catching it, go to fearlessforward.org or subscribe to my weekly bulletin at skillfulleaders.com.